I'm going to acknowledge that we have a quorum this morning. I was going to ask for unanimous consent to proceed, but why don't we, since we're still waiting for our vice president of the council, why don't we go right to some administrative stuff? The agenda. Does anybody have anything they want to propose in addition to the draft agenda that we circulated last week?
I move approval of the agenda.
Thank you. Second.
Second.
Okay, do I hear any opposition? If I hear no opposition, we will consider the agenda adopted by unanimous consent. And since we don't, I'll ask that the minutes reflect and record the names of the members who are present this morning. We had circulated last week the minutes of our last meeting in October. Does anybody have anything they want to suggest as proposed changes to the October 11th, 2023 meeting minutes that we circulated?
It's just a different word. I think it was changed in one place, but not the other. Council, the word.
Word council.
Council, yeah. What is it? Can't get to
Yes.
C at the bottom of the.
Right. There was the
page.
word
Good morning,
council.
everyone.
Morning.
Yeah.
The word council was spelled as in county council, and it should have been spelled as in legal counsel.
Correct.
And that change was made in one place, and we'll make it in the second place. I think it's on the second page, right after the word Mr. Lynch, which is appropriate that you noticed.
Okay.
Okay, that will be changed. With that change, do I have any motions to adopt this agenda as circulated?
Motion to adopt the minutes. We
Second.
had the agenda already.
Minutes. Okay, we have a second. Do I hear any opposition to adopting the minutes of October as revised? Hearing no opposition, we will consider the minutes adopted by unanimous consent. This is the point where I would typically introduce our vice president of the council, but again, his schedule seems to be running a little behind. So why don't we go to an easier item right off the top? I circulated a draft of what would be a press release. I don't know if you all had a chance to look at it, but there is a copy of it in the package at the end of the table. It's a handheld. The idea is that we are seeking at this time public suggestions on topics we should be looking into or should consider at least looking into. And I thought the easiest way to do that would be to issue something on the website for this commission, but issue it as a press release where it would appear on the website. But also it would be my intent to circulate essentially the same document to the chairs of our 5 citizens advisory boards, so that they're aware of it and they can put it on the agenda of their advisory boards and have the members in their region look at it and to see if they want to discuss it as part of their agenda and whether they have some suggestions for us. So I'm going to make a motion at this time that this commission adopt that procedure and go forward with that, barring any comments from the staff that says.
I have a question, Jim.
Yeah.
So I know that your plan was that we would have some number of meetings out at the advisory boards, but it
Right.
doesn't speak to the like how many or when. I assume that's because you need to speak to the chairs of those
Correct.
boards first. Is that what you're
Correct.
thinking?
Correct. They typically meet once a month, although I've looked at their minutes and I see that some of them don't get quorums to meet once a month. But I also thought that it would probably be best if we waited to actually meet with them until they've had a chance to put this on their agenda after the press release, have a discussion amongst themselves as to whether they have any suggestions. And then and then also we might actually have some topics that we've actually already decided to go forward and proceed. And we would have something more specific to discuss with them. So I thought it would probably be best if we had those discussions with them in the timeframe of January or February before we're making any firm votes on specific issues. The holiday time is probably December is probably not a good time. But
So
I
Jim,
thought-
if I remember rightly, like we've been talking about sort of two tiers of issues, the issues for like the first year, and then we have another 2 years to work on a second round of issues. So
Correct.
is your thinking that we would kind of come up with our own agenda for the first tier, and then the second tier would be in consultation with all of those other groups when we meet with them, giving them
I
a bit
think
more
that's-
time?
I think that's right, with one caveat, that I think we probably need to have some sort of a public outreach, you call it a listening session or something, in January or February, so that we have at least some public input on whatever issues we are taking forward in that first report. Some sort of a public outreach, and it may be a cover-all approach, and it may only be one session or 2 sessions. But we do probably have to have something, and they could certainly be invited to that as well, in public. But yeah, right, you're right. Trying to have 5 mini hearings at 5 different locations in a very short time frame of January to February would be very, very difficult.
Thank you. I appreciate your thoughts into that. I move a second adoption of this plan.
Now, I got a question. Should we put the timing in that motion, with the expectation that we would do something, open it to the public, say in January and February, shoot for that time? And
It
put
does,
that in the motion?
there is a reference to a public listening session. I've got it in front of me here. There
Third
is-
bullet, the third bullet of number 1 says a separate public notice listening session will be held in January or February.
But I think you're raising another point, which is that should there be, in our request for comments, should we put an end date on it? It's like, please comment by.
Personally, I think so.
Yeah, well, the only reason I was reluctant to do it because it looks a little bit like a deadline, like we don't want them after that date, and because we're here 2 to 3 years here. I thought, they might come in after January or February and we would use them at a different time, but we wouldn't not use them, right? We'd accept comments at any time from between now and 2025. So I was a little reluctant to put a sort of a termination date on.
But we could say it like
Could say
that.
it, we could, so
The
let's,
first report, comments to be included in the first report should be submitted by January 15th.
yeah, let's see how it's, yeah, we could do that. It's just, it's currently seeking suggestions that the topics included duplicate hard. Comments are right after that first sentence of that paragraph, would say. Those comments are requested by January 15th. Not, let's not use the word required, but requested by. Is January 15th sound good for you? Yeah,
Yeah, and
Yeah.
should we added an additional statement that comments received after that date may be considered in a subsequent report? So you're not excluding anyone who wants to say something before it's January 6th.
That's a great idea. And I would say will be considered, not may be considered. That's
Okay.
good.
okay, I'm good with this. We will make those changes. Anybody have anything else to add?
I'll second.
With a second? Do I hear any opposition to adopting this as our press release and request for comments? With those changes? Hearing no objections, we'll consider that adopted by unanimous consent. And now, we have our guest, Council Vice President Andrew Friedson, joining us this morning. We also have Dale Tibbetts from the County Executive's Office joining us as a guest this morning. Thank you very much for being here.
I'm not speaking.
I want to thank you for sharing your time with us this morning. We're going to give you some time to talk to us about what you think this commission should be doing and comment on the work of the commission. And then afterwards, I hope we'll have some time for Q's and A's. And so I will turn it directly over to Vice President Friedson.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and it's great to be here. Welcome to the council office building. I stand on the shoulders of giants. So it's great to see Howie Dennis here, who is my predecessor's predecessor, which I take very seriously that responsibility to be the momentary caretaker of
I'm
this.
proud to be represented by you.
I appreciate it, this district seat. So, first of all, let me just say thank you. This is a big undertaking to be the stewards of essentially the county's constitution. Something that I know you all take very seriously. I appreciate just in the bit that I was listening in on the emphasis that you all have on engaging the community and getting feedback and getting ideas in being thoughtful and deliberative in your work, even being careful in each word that you choose. When we're writing a memo, it's one thing. When we're writing the county's constitution, it's quite another. And so I just express my appreciation for that. I'm very proud to have a group like this, to have a county that has a resident commission like this one to weigh in on these issues. I look forward to being able to work together with you. I know at times there have been some contentiousness, I will say, with this group and the elected officials of the county. I hope to not have that, and I hope to be able to work together in partnership with you, to be able to lean on each other, to be able to support one another, and to be able to lift up your work. So thank you for inviting me today. I think today is part of that, but I hope it's not the end of that. I hope that you'll continue to engage me in any way that I can be helpful to you and to support your work. And I certainly will feel the same way, to feel like I can reach out to you to do the same. So if you want, I could just go into the few items. Does that work for you, Mr. Chairman?
Works for me.
Great. So I have three items that I wanted for consideration. I'll be very clear. I intentionally did not come up with specific, hard and fast, here's exactly what I think should be placed on a ballot for your consideration. But three more, overarching ideas that have nuances and layers to them, some legal dynamics that your amazing staff attorney here has offered me a little bit of initial feedback on, but I think requires further exploration. It's cup two that will have to give me no trouble. Because I think they ought to be considered, and then figuring out what the different dynamics are. And I don't think most of these are not, novel and crazy concepts, to be clear. So the first one is independently elected council president. I believe President Glass may have discussed this with you. This is something that's been talked about for years. This is a major conversation that we had on the council side of things. Last time there was an interest in this, in at least getting, putting it on the ballot and seeing what people thought about it. But ultimately, there were a number of different dynamics to it that hadn't been fully fleshed out. And the thought was, at least from my perspective, I think this is actually something that would be quite interesting for this group to take a look at and think through all the different nuances of it, because you don't just change that, you have to change some other things as well in terms of the way that the council and the county government is structured. So, yes, please.
Would you envision something similar to the county executive?
No, I would actually envision something more similar to the city of Baltimore or the District of Columbia, where there's a chief executive that has all administrative functions and runs the day-to-day operation of the county, has prescribed duties, but that the presiding officer of the council is directly elected by the people as opposed to by colleagues. So the couple thoughts that I have had, and again, I'm not rigid on any of these, just some suggestions to consider. But I would suggest keeping the 11 council members. I think this would be abrupt to add add more members at a subsequent election for consideration from residents. But we have 4 at large currently in 7 districts. You could have 3 at large, and one of those at large would be the fourth could be the council president. It would function in a similar way. You'd be not changing the representation. A resident would be voting on a council president, 3 at large, and a district council member. So keeping the same construction design is how I would envision it for your consideration. The council still elect leaders every December. The council would elect the vice president, and the vice president would serve in the role of president in the absence of the president. In the same way that we do now, it's just the council currently elects both. But the primary function for the presiding officer would be a 4-year term. The way in which I have seen it in other places and the way in which it essentially works here already is it's essentially a weak presiding officer. You are only as powerful as the majority allows you to be on the body. So you have agenda setting, you can establish the committee structure as council president. The council president would establish membership and chairs, but subject to the majority vote of council or the majority support. So for instance, council president puts forward an agenda. If the majority of council members want to add or remove something from the agenda, they would have the power to do that. That's how we function today. And I wouldn't necessarily envision any dramatic change to that. A few reasons why I think it would be helpful. One, the role of the county executive has expanded dramatically. And really the council has not, from a co-equal branch of government dynamic. And having an individual presiding officer that is aligned, 4-year term and 4-year term, I think is a more, equaling of the co-equal branches of government, just from a good government standpoint. Also, historically, the view of the council president being elected among colleagues, and former council member Dennis can speak to this well, the idea of it at its best is that it adds to collegiality, that it forces you to be nice to your colleagues, to be a good colleague, because ultimately, if not this year or next year, the year after, at some point, you're going to need that colleague to support you in leadership. And if they think you're a jerk, to put it bluntly, they're not likely to do that. If they think you're going to, have factions and other things, they're less likely to do it. The challenge is, in the current world that we're in the social media world and the public nature of it, our leadership elections have become very public, which is different than what they used to be, from my perspective, in terms of outside groups and interests really weighing in on what they want and who they want, even council members going to outside groups to try to garner support. And so we're functioning in a way where it is only the particular outside groups and people who are paying really, really close attention, who have essentially access to the council, who have any awareness that is going on. And then we have a public question now of how these elections happen. Now, the reality is you go door to door, phone call by phone call, and you call to get support, and the first person who gets majority support essentially becomes the president and the vice president, generally the vice president, unless there have been a couple cases, at least that I'm aware of, where the vice president has become the president. But there are real questions that have been raised, including by some colleagues and at the dais, last election of officers, of whether that is a transparent and accountable process, whether voters should have the ability to weigh in. So to me, I think it is a co-equal branch of government, better balance, number one. Number two, I think is more transparent and accountable, and it provides a greater opportunity for all voters to weigh in, as opposed to only kind of, the insiders, the people who are very active in council issues.
Would you envision this role? I know you were talking about some of the things we do. The actual responsibilities being any different depending on this method of election, or is this just a matter in a sense of giving the person more, cachet, more substance, more support at his back kind of thing, to do the same things they're
Yeah, I think it's more than cachet because it allows for a 4-year.
Right, but I mean, but
Yeah.
in terms of the actual responsibilities the person would be doing.
No.
Those as being any different.
No, I don't.
Okay.
I think, one of the challenges and, presuming that all things go
Heft. I was thinking-
to plan, I'm going through this now. Of, thinking about transitioning into this role, and a year is very short. Particularly given the amount of work, the public expectations, the constituent dynamics, which are greater than they have been previously. So this, 30 years ago, that was different. Just in terms of, all the different dynamics. 1 year is a very short period of time. And so, yes, I personally would not increase the power. I don't think it's necessary to increase the powers of the job. But the longevity of 4 years in and of itself allows for, I think, a better balance with the executive branch.
Could the extension though be handled with a rule change versus a charter change?
Well, it could only be handled.
I mean, just talking about that aspect.
Well, the charter change would allow the voters to vote directly. So that would be the main change for that. The other change is the longevity
Right.
piece. And technically the answer is yes. In practicality, the answer is there no chance from my perspective, because you would have to get 11 council members, 10 of them to agree to allow one to be the presiding officer for 4 straight years. Mike Leggett is, everybody's role model and eminence. He was council president 2 years in a row, and there are a lot of dynamics for why and how that happened, and it takes some interesting circumstances and also brilliant political acumen like has to be able to do that, and even that was unprecedented. So for it to be 4 years for a full term, I don't think it's possible. But I also think if you're going to allow somebody to serve 4 years, the voters should be deciding that. I mean, to me, that is a relatively long tenure to be, quote unquote, in power. And again, the council presidency, the power is in exposure and in agenda setting. Other than that, you serve at the will of the majority of the body. It's not nothing, but it's not overwhelming, and I don't think it should be. Like, I think each council member needs to have, significant power, and I think the body as a majority needs to rule. And I don't envision that changing. And by the way, it is different here than in Annapolis or Capitol Hill. We have a weak committee structure too. So it's not as if, we have a 3 reading calendar and you kill bills in committee and the presiding officer, and the committee chairs, conspire to decide what goes and, what dies. I mean, that doesn't really happen here in the same way. We don't have a formal committee process in that sense.
In terms of the election versus not election, the one drawback you're seeing is just potentially this lack of collegiality or whatever, or the impact on having to be nice to the rest of your council members, because I got elected and, I don't need to pay attention to you. That's the one potential drawback. Is there anything else that you see out there that is just the election part versus continuing to be picked by the council?
Well, I think the argument some might make, just to be fair to it, would be like the politicization of council president job. My view is like that ship has sailed. There are, and I think outside groups have a certain view of what the council president is. Like, I have always viewed it as like, this is an internal job to be the steward of the body, like in the institutional role of legislating and of, being council members. It's not tied to political views, but it's construed that way in the public, which I think is part of the challenge. Is like as if the agenda of the council and what gets voted on and doesn't get voted on is going to be dictated by the council president. I haven't seen that since I've been here, but that's the perception in the community, which is part of why certain groups want to engage in this and others don't, but most voters have no idea. And I think the other thing is, just from a democracy standpoint, I can't tell you how many times people tell me the wrong council president. The council president from 2 years ago, they'll say, oh, so-and-so is the council president. Now, with my own level of humility here, I understand most people don't know that, I'm a council member, or what my name is, or what district I represent. I get it, but the changing year to year is hard to follow as a voter, as a resident, of the county as well, and most voters don't follow it. The people who are really paying close attention do, and the people who are just going about their lives but are significantly impacted. And I think as we are changing all of our structures and our processes to think about not the people who pay attention, but the people generally who don't, I talk about win outside the room, don't worry about just the people who show up to the council, worry about the people who don't show up to the council and what they care about and why they're not showing up and how we can engage them. I think this is an example of that. We're currently, it's an insider's game, and I think we all should be thinking about how we can make it more of an outsider's game.
Yeah, if that were to change, the general election, how would you envision the transition? Would it be 2 years in the next election for the county council? Is that type of thing, or would it be quicker than that?
Yeah, well, so I think it's a good question. I think it relates to my third option. So can I? Yeah, I will get back to that because I think there are questions. Like, again, this is why I don't have a fully baked, here's exactly what I would do. I have a thought that I'd like you all to consider and think about and decide the pros and cons and whether or not it's worth getting voters to decide. But there are some nuances to that. That's one of the questions, because terms is one of the things that I want to talk about, and staggering of terms.
So I think one part is if this commission is able to come to its recommendation as soon as it's first reported this coming May, our council would have the option to put it on the ballot as soon as the November election 2024, in which case it could be effective as soon as they elect a new president, but that would be up to them in terms of how they put it on the ballot. They ultimately have to say how it goes on the ballot. If they wanted to put it into effect in December of 2024, right after that election, they could do that, or they could wait till the 2026 election. That would ultimately be up to them. We can make a recommendation on it, but they get to decide, right?
Yeah, I think in an ideal world, if you were going to go down this path, aligning it as we currently are structured quadrennially makes the most sense. So putting it on the ballot for the presidential year and then having, if it gets approved by voters, implementing it for, our, the 21st council, the next quadrennial term would be the easiest, cleanest, if you were going to do it.
2026.
Yeah, 2026, yeah.
So here's my question. I asked this of Evan, so I'm gonna ask it of you.
Sure.
So let's.
Should have watched, so I knew Jim's great question.
Let's assume
Yeah.
that you've got 2 or 3 really stellar candidates. They're at-large candidates. Some of them are already at-large members, but these are 3 people who would all think they would make great presidents, and they run, right? And so they have a choice. If I want to run to be president, I got to run against these 2 other people, and the 3. One of us is going to be president. The other 2 aren't going to have a seat on this council, and they may be your 3 best council candidates in the whole county. But they have to pick to run just for one of the 4 spots. And so you've got your other 3 landlord spots going to other people, but you had your 3 best candidates running for president. So another option seems to me is to say, look, we've got great candidates. They don't have to choose among themselves which spot they're running for. The voters get to make that choice. They all put their names on the ballot, and whoever the top vote getter is in that election, that's who your president is. Voters know that they're voting for, and I guess that someone say that leads to bullet voting, right? People going, I want to vote for the person to come to the top. I just don't want to vote for my 4 at large. I only want to vote for one. And so that's a dilemma, right? For voters to say, I'm going to bullet vote so I get this person to be president. But in truth, it would be voters ultimately just based on the number of votes that with the top voter getter was, that's who the president is. Which of those 2 makes more sense to you?
I think it is clearer, more transparent, and cleaner, particularly if at some point, let's say we go to ranked choice voting, the option of the top vote getter becomes a little bit tougher, particularly to your point of bullet voting and other things. I personally think, be very clear with people, put the title and the job, let them vote for it, let them understand what they voted for. and move forward. I get your point, but ultimately, to me, the tie should always go to the voter, not to the politician or elected official or candidates who, are horse trading and deciding you run for this and I'll run for that, or I don't want to run because you're good. And that's not necessarily in a nefarious way, because generally it could be because I think you're really good and because we work well together. But I think that those are choices that candidates should make. I think the ultimate decision though should rest with the voter. And I think, the other aspect of it is it is a slightly different job. And there may be certain people who would like to be a council member, but would prefer not to be the council president. And so, I think that, I think allowing, knowing what you're getting into, truth in advertising, to me, my personal view, and again, I think you all should decide, and I'll respect the decision that you make. But ultimately, if we're going to have a four-year term directly voted by the voters, I think they should know what they're voting for.
So you can get really creative here and say, let them run for both. Mr.
Jim,
President,
if I may, Jim, if I may, I'm sorry, I've been trying to get in here for a minute.
Oh, I'm sorry. We don't have a hand raising, so we can't tell. So yeah. Go ahead.
Hi, Mr. Friesen. This is CC Grant, District 19. I have, so first of all, I just want to clarify that I have been involved in lobbying at the state and federal level for 15 years, and I do not understand Montgomery County Council. So to your point, there is definitely a need for some more structure so that there's more transparency. Because if I'm a quote unquote professional and I'm like, who's the president this year again? There is definitely a need for, clarity and transparency and some stability. I have always thought that the 1 year is crazy. But most cities across the country, not all, but most cities have the top vote getter become automatically the council president. This is a way to do it that's kind of clear, and clearing across the board. Whoever's running for council at large, the top vote getter becomes the council president. I guess the logic is the top vote getter is the one who's done most engagement, most support from the community. And to the point that Mr. Friesen made, that maybe that top getter doesn't want to be council president. I've never seen that happen, but I'm sure there could be, something written, either in the rules that person can decline and it goes to the next highest vote getter. But I have seen, a type of structure like that, that seems to be the norm, the rule rather than the exception. And I think that's a pretty common good governance proposal that we could think about.
Yeah, it's good. I can't speak to what is most common. I know a lot of bodies elect their own presiding officers. I know some bodies do it that way, with the top vote getter, and I know some bodies elect directly. I still do think it is more transparent to tell people what they're voting for.
I'm going to give you both
Personally.
ones. So here's the creative idea.
Yeah.
You're going to have a top line that says vote for your president. Anyone wants to put their name in, and then you have the at-large seats, and you can put your name on both lines. And on the at-large seats, it's the top vote getters who become the at-large members, and you go down until you hit 4. So you have a president. So if somebody ends up being the top vote getter and the president, you just keep going down till you get 4 total.
It's creative. That's creative. That's an interesting way to do it. I would not necessarily be opposed to that. I'd have to give it some more thought, of that. But I think that it's something for you all to consider. The other thing to consider as part of your deliberations is the term limit issue. So the question, and to me, I think this is where, for me, from my perspective, I think you have a couple choices here that you can weigh. I mean, obviously you have unlimited choices, but realistically, One would be you say, we currently don't differentiate between a district council member and an at-large council member. You can't go from one to the other. Some places do. Some places you can go from a district council member for a certain number of terms, then you can swap to a at-large council member. In fact, in some places, they created at-large council members specifically to bypass term limits. I don't personally think that that is in keeping with the spirit of the will of the voters personally, but, and I'm not a huge, I haven't historically been a huge fan of legislative term limits generally. So one option would just be you keep 3 terms and it doesn't matter what seat you're in, you're at large, your district, or your council president, regardless of how you structure it, 3 terms max, done. The other option, if you are electing the council president, you could say 1 term only. You can only serve in that role for 1 term only. It would limit the, the power, the Mike Miller effect, the Mike Bush effect of a presiding officer, in that role for decades. I don't know that that would happen at the council, but if that was a concern, you could, and the choice of running for council president would partially be in that you only get 1 term, and that's a real calculation and a decision that you have to make. You could also do something that has a little bit of precedent, like the planning board, for instance, where we say there's a term limit, but if you get elected chair, you can get an additional term. So, for instance, if after 1 term you run for council president, you would then you could do 2 terms as council president, total of 3 terms, But if you get elected in your 3rd term as council president, you would be able to get a 4th term. So you could look at the planning board and see that as an option. That is something that we've done, where you get 2 terms on the planning board as a maximum, but the council has the ability to appoint as chair, and you could then get a 3rd term to be chair. The idea being to provide opportunities for longevity, institutional background, et cetera. But it's still a choice. Like you don't automatically get that. You could get that. So again, I don't have extremely strong feelings here. I mean, I do feel like the will of the voters who have already spoken on term limits, like I prefer not to relitigate that issue personally, but finding a way to, within those confines of addressing that issue, is something that I think that this body should look at.
I mean, do you think that the general 12, I guess, 3 terms, 12 years, in whatever combination, including being president, do you think that's generally enough? Or are you thinking that you want to perhaps have the option of a president being able to serve 16 years if he does it at the end or something like that?
Yeah, I think the bigger question is whether or not I'm kind of attracted to the idea of just saying the council president can do 4 years. Like, I'm a little concerned about having an 8 or 12-year council president.
I wasn't saying that. That's just his terms altogether. If he had 2 other terms.
Yeah.
Or we could do a term, a president, a term or something, but anyway, just total.
Yeah, I think if you treated it differently and you just said the council president can serve 1 term, and whether you serve 3 terms as a district or an at-large council member, a combination of the 2 or not, you get 1 term, and then, I would personally be fine with that. I can speak for myself. Like, again, I generally am not a big fan of legislative term limits. I think there are reasons for executive term limits, president, et cetera, the governor. But generally legislative term limits, I like Congress and others that people have been talking about for years, it's not something that I have been, historically supportive of. But if you were asking me personally, like, do I think 12 years is enough for me? Yes. On the council, I mean, it's a tough job. I mean, I'll say it's a tough job, and the days of doing it as a part-time job are gone. We don't pay as a part-time job. We don't treat it as a part-time job. I don't think we should. But it's a lot. And I think, we used to have a scenario where, people do this at certain points of their career. And that has changed too, which is a good thing. I think it's expanded the ability of people to do it. So, if you're asking me, I would either say 3 terms total or a 1-term council president, clean, simple, that's it. And then it would provide more opportunities for more council members to run for that, run for that seat in subsequent elections. One of the challenges that we have, the historic nature in Montgomery County is there was a significant amount of stasis. And it was all based on the executive. So like whether the executive ran for another term or didn't run for another term, based on incumbency advantages and others, dictated much of the, the body politic of the county. I think providing opportunities where that is not how it works is helpful to democracy, to better representation, to creating more more competitive races, more opportunities for more people to get involved and to engage. And that's the other reason why I think having a separate council president race. I mean, I think you'll get more candidates. I really do, because I think you'll get certain candidates who run for council president. I think you get certain candidates who run for the at-large race, and I think in aggregate you'll get more total. And I think that's a good thing, personally.
Thank you for being here. Thank you. I mean it for your service and for your contributions to the county.
Jim, we have a hand up over here.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead.
Do I have the floor? Yeah, okay. I'll yield the floor, but
Oh, it's up to you.
okay, I'll yield the floor and then I'll come back and incorporate by reference what I started out by saying.
Go ahead.
Can't
My
see the
hand-
hands.
I'm sorry.
Baxter.
Whose
ahead.
hand is up?
Yours.
You're on.
Okay, well, I did have a question about your comments about outside groups that have somehow are influencing or attempting to influence the candidates. And could you tell me generally what you mean by outside group? Is that outside the county or?
No. Groups within the county. I mean, there's nothing untoward about it. It's just a question of whether or not, we have this kind of inside outside dynamic now where there are people who send letters and weigh in and privately communicate with council members about who they're voting for, and they get tabs of, who's supporting whom. And it's only a small number of very active people and groups who are aware of what's going on. And to me, that's the thing that I think we should all be looking inward and deciding, is that something that we're comfortable with? And something that we think is best for the county.
And that would be a totally separate issue than what we've talked about so far.
No, I think it's directly related, because my view is if it's going to be outside groups and, folks weighing in, then it should be an election. Like, the people should decide. It should be democratized. I think it should be one or the other. Is really my view. It either should be an internal conversation about, who is best to lead a collegial body, not on, policy or political breakdowns, but on, who will manage the meetings and who will oversee the processes, and, who will help to facilitate communication among colleagues. And, or it should be an external conversation of who is best fit to represent the community and to lead. But we're increasingly, I don't think we're quite at a terrible place or anything of such, but I kind of see slowly where this is headed, which is why I've raised it, where you have a small group of consistent advocates who are weighing in very heavily on leadership elections here of who's, president and vice president. And most people have no idea that that's going on. I just don't think that's particularly healthy. There's also a perception, I don't think it's reality, but it's a perception that the council president plays a significant role in dictating the outcomes of policy issues and debates. I don't think that's particularly healthy, because, I view this role as the steward of the body, the person who is supposed to, manage the meetings and make sure the meetings are productive and constructive. And manage the processes of the council to make sure that we're doing the type of engagement and communication that is happening, but that's not how it's perceived. And so I think you can solve that by just having a public, election, and democratize the process. And the last piece is, really for the first time, there began a very public conversation at the council of, what is the process for electing a council president? And, historically, it's, happens behind closed doors. I mean, this is how many legislative decisions get made. But this is one that you could avoid. You don't have to have it behind closed doors. You can elect it, make it public.
Thank you.
Andrew, just thank you again for all of your service. And just by way of council lore, Tom Perez and I served together on the council, as you may know, when it was a 9-member council. And came a time when the Democrats were divided 4-4 as to who should be the council president. And Tom was the only one who remembered that I actually had a vote. So I'm very proud to have been one of the 5 that made his presidency possible. A couple of maybe out of the box suggestions here. One of the issues that I have with the election process is that we elect our statewide and local officials in the so-called off year.
Yeah.
The non-presidential year, when turnout is very, very low. It's extraordinarily low in the so-called off year, which is our gubernatorial year, and we follow the gubernatorial system down to the local level. I'm wondering if it was ever contemplated or discussed to have the council elections or county elections in the presidential year.
Well, I am glad you asked, because it's one of my other suggestions, we talked a lot about this one, so I'm gonna transition to this exact point, is to stagger terms. So the idea would be you would do both. You would have, elections in the presidential year and in the gubernatorial year. Many municipalities do this, by the way. Now that we have term limits, we have these wave elections, and they're not wave elections because the voters decided them to be wave elections. I'm all for that. I respect, elections have consequences and we should live with those consequences, even if they're, I disagree with them. But in my first term, 5 years ago, we had 4 of 9 new council members, which was considered to be a huge wave of new folks based on term limits. This current council had a majority of new people, 6 new council members. Again, I don't know this is necessarily a bad thing, but these are huge levels of turnover that are happening, and it does, there are learning curves to any job, and this is not an easy job. It's a complicated county, $6.8 billion budget, and a majority of the council was learning the budget for the first time in what was, to say the least, a very controversial budget. Whether you agree or disagreed with any individual decision, it's a very complicated, very controversial budget. I think by staggering the terms, you both address that issue, and you have the ability to better engage people, because I agree with you. I am concerned about voter turnout in general. To exclusively have the council elected and the county executive elected in off-year gubernatorial primaries, essentially. I mean, I know that's not the job of this group to think through who actually gets elected, but the reality, the outcome, at least in the current dynamic, is, the winners are almost inevitably, there aren't very many Howie Dennis's anymore. And so a teeny tiny sliver of people are electing people who have tremendous amount of power voting on a $6.8 billion budget. So, you know, to me, staggering of terms would be a way to address that, because I think it would solve two, or at least address two problems. The challenge there is the transition. And then the other challenge to think about is, you know, we have thought about this as 4-year terms. You know, this is the 20th council. The next council will be the 21st council. That's based on the quadrennial, on the gubernatorial. You know, you could change the way you view that to 2-year councils. You know, things change. I would like to say in local government, the only thing that people hate more than the way things are is change. You know, I personally think that is something that you really should take a look at, because I think it'll both engage a lot more people in the process for who represents them, and it will help to, I think, lessen the negative consequences of term limits, which are these, you know, major turnovers of people where the voters aren't deciding for a major upheaval of change. The structure has decided for a major upheaval of change, and there's some institutional, you know, background that gets lost in that, and a learning curve that's all happening at once. It also puts a lot of pressure, you know, from a staffing and, you know, cost standpoint of just, you know, orientations and getting people up to speed and staffing up and human resource. I mean, there's just a lot of dynamics that happen when you have, you know, what could be 6, 7 new people, you know, commonly.
Well, the other point, I just want to read 2 points, and then my only 2 points. You touched on this indirectly when you referred to the District of Columbia. The District of Columbia requires minority party representation. And I'm just wondering if in all of your discussions, you've ever thought about that or discussed it in terms of Montgomery County, in terms of political diversity, you might say, and requiring it. It doesn't have to be the Republican Party. It could be another party, whatever party would qualify, and then go through the process of getting on the ballot and so on and so forth. Have you ever thought about having minority party requirement?
Well, admittedly, I'm a partisan. You know, I'm here as a partisan. I was elected as a partisan. I understand the interest in that. You know, I will say, it's not something that I have explored. It's not something that I necessarily would, you know, personally support or move towards. I mean, I think ultimately, voters should get to decide who represents them, and if other parties are struggling, they should change what they represent and who they represent, and who is representing what they're representing, in order to gain more support from the public. But I mean, I do understand the interest in diversity of thought, and I do think if it's less of a partisan, like I'm not terribly supportive of the partisan issue, but I am supportive of the broader question that you're raising, which is how do we engage more people in the process? Like, if the question is, Andrew, are you comfortable with the fact that, you know, less than 20% of eligible voters, you know, are voting? Sometimes it's 12%, to decide people who represent them, to oversee a $6.8 billion budget, to represent 1.1 million people, to make huge decisions that have major impacts on families' lives, on businesses' ability to succeed. No, I'm not comfortable with that. And I think we should be thinking of every possible way we can to engage more people in the process.
12% and maybe only like 4% who actually control the process, but also in terms, if any thought can be given to it, broadening the coalition going forward to the voters. If you had minority party representation, it might be it might be a way of broadening the coalition.
Yeah, if you were going to go, my suggestion is, if you're going to go in the direction of looking at expanding representation from a partisan standpoint, I would strongly suggest you look at ways that the voters express their wills, not that the structure forces it. So I would not have minority party representation personally, because I think that's out of step with the will of the voters, which I think should supersede all generally. But I think you could look at other avenues. So like another avenue of that would be to look at, the way the primary elections work, some of which are not within the constructs of the county, but an open primary would be another, way to, I think there are other ways to do it where it may reduce the extremism that we're seeing in broader politics in general, but in a way that doesn't, again, allows voters to express their will, doesn't express will on behalf of voters, because I wouldn't be terribly comfortable with that, if that makes sense.
Final question on staggered.
Yeah,
Okay. You are suggesting, 2-year terms possibly for council members?
well, actually,
How would that work with like a 4-year term for them?
yeah, that's what I think the transition is the piece that you really need to think through. And I don't have a specific answer to that. I think there are lots of ways to do it, but you'd have to think through that. You also could pass it and then leave the transition to legislation, where we'd have to follow through with, and that's something from a legal standpoint to, think through. I mean, not every detail on a ballot question is always fleshed out. Sometimes and then the law has to then fulfill the will of the voters, but there are, things that you can do to mitigate it. I would foresee 4-year terms. I mean, I think 2-year terms are not great. I mean, I think if our example of 2-year terms is Congress, I don't exactly think it's the shining light of representative, little R Republican, little D Democratic process. I think it makes it very partisan. It makes it very focused on fundraising and gaining political support, and less focused on, collegial dynamics of, working with colleagues. You're more focused on the outside, world than you are the inner workings of actually governing. Used to be able to get away with that in Congress, I think, because it was less public, so like many things, social media has democratized information. There's negative sides to democracy, too, in the added transparency that we have provided in the legislative process. We have lost some of the collegiality and some of the ability of people to work together, because you're afraid to be vilified if you're seen, God forbid, Tom Perez is getting one of his votes from a Republican, Howie Dennis, boy, he might get beaten up for that. And, I long for the days when, one of the most progressive Democrats on the council could go to the one Republican on the council who he had a good relationship with, and who they both respected each other, and they could support one another when it was in, both of their, comfort levels and interests. But yeah, I think you're gonna have to figure that out, and maybe there's a 2-year term as part of the transition for some of the for some of the folks, but I think that's what needs
So the trash collection in the parks is not a partisan issue. I mean, that's really what makes it possible.
Yes.
That the issues that you deal with are not really
Yeah.
Partisan in nature. But
on Capitol Hill, I would argue even today, trash collection has become a partisan issue.
because I think
The one person who says it's a Republican idea or a Democratic idea.
it's
Naming a post office, things that I would never have thought would have been controversial. Passing the debt limit, by the way, which used to not be a partisan issue, it's become a partisan issue.
always reapportionment is part of what stymies the system. If you're saying a Democrat in a Democratic state and reapportionment comes along, you want to hold on to your number of Democrats and add to your number of Democrats by the way you draw the lines as constitutionally as possible. But partisanship has something to do with it. And likewise, in the Republican state, the opposite. So as a result, you get these districts where only one party can get elected, I think in like 85% of the districts as a result of so there's really only like, a handful, 20 or 30 swing districts. And that's where so much of the money goes. So, but anyway, that's part of the problem is reapportionment itself, and at a smaller level, it's.
Agreed, and we're not here to talk about that, personally, but I agree, and I think, listen, I think voters should elect their representatives, not the other way around. And I think that is true across the board. So the last thing that I just wanted to raise for you is vacancies. So there's two main aspects to vacancies. One, I think we should be moving to special elections. I think this is a major issue that people are talking about. And it is a real concern. Frankly, it has been more of a concern at the state level than at the county level, just in terms of people not completing their terms for a variety of reasons. This has been much less of an issue historically at the council. Maybe that changes at some point, but I think we should think about that and prepare for it. Vacancies are specifically prescribed in the charter, as you all know, section 106 for the council and section 205 for the executive. Number one, there's a formal process only after the council and the executive have been part of the process, depending on which it relates to, either both or one. But the central committees play a role formally in this. I think you should really seriously consider whether or not we're comfortable with that. There are legitimate questions of whether or not central committees should play as prominent a role. I think that's worthy of a discussion. I'm not here to tell you, absolutely take that out, but I think that is absolutely, something that you ought to think about. And my personal preference would be, to the greatest extent possible, to allow voters to decide. So really thinking through that issue. Now, there are
There's a
questions.
cost to that, though.
Yes, so my, in an ideal world, and there are some legal considerations that we've discussed that are being explored. In an ideal world, for me, you would appoint only until the next election. By the way, staggered elections would help with this. But you could appoint only until the next election, so that there would never be a chance for someone to serve 3.5 years, for instance, of an unexpired term, which means that, it's almost an entire 4-year term where voters had no chance to weigh in or decide. At most, it would be less than 2 years. You would go to the next election. So if there's a presidential election, the next already scheduled
County election.
well, it doesn't have to be a county election. Our county. Yeah, it wouldn't be a municipal, it would have to be a county-wide election, but not necessarily, if we don't do staggered terms, it wouldn't necessarily have to be the next election for the county executive and the council. It could be the next presidential election. The Board of Elections is already putting out ballots. It's already spending, it would change, virtually, unless you went to an extra sheet of paper on the ballot because of the candidates, like it wouldn't really have a meaningful cost impact. There are questions of, there is certainly legal authority, from what I am told. I don't play, I'm not a lawyer, I don't play one even on Zoom. That under our charter authority, the county can establish special elections as a way to fill vacancies. That's established.
Correct.
The question, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, is whether or not the county has the ability to appoint basically somebody to hold a seat in the interim until there's a special election. So I believe the law envisioned the special election ability to happen immediately. To say within 30 days, the council will set the date and, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And there, it would be a very short window. I don't think, based on what I have seen, when the state was discussing providing these powers or considering providing these powers, because some of it was based on a Senate debate that never passed the House. They weren't envisioning it being, waiting till the next regularly scheduled election, just based on practicality, voter. Random time special elections for a municipal election like this, the turnout is likely to be extremely low. So waiting until the next regularly scheduled election, I think has a lot of merit. It also saves a significant amount of costs. There's also not the burden, the Board of Elections, to even staff it, which is a challenge in a good year, it would be increasingly challenged under a short timeline with a lack of preparation. But that's really the legal question. My view is it was clear in what was expressly allowed and not allowed that the state was envisioning a short window. And so that's what they were considering of not allowing, not the idea of the next regularly scheduled election. We haven't talked about this yet, but that's my view. It seems very clear in what I have read based on my basic, very non-lawyerly, very simple-minded view. But that's something I think would be something to consider. And I think there are a few things that would send a better signal to residents that, we don't get to pick our own here. There's a dynamic that happens where central committees pick delegates, where the council here picks its own replacement, for one of its colleagues, that I think makes people uncomfortable. And I think there's a reason for that. I mean, I think there are times where that's appropriate, but I think that should be the last resort, not the first resort. So, I think the first resort should be figuring out, is it practical and how, and do we have the legal authority to allow voters to decide who represents them? And to me, that is a special election, and that is ideally, maybe most reasonably, at the next regularly scheduled election. And then the question is, what happens in the interim?
So there's no special elections now? There's no special elections in case of a vacancy?
No, it's
That's how I got elected. There was a special election, so something must have changed.
It's been a long time since I looked at it, so my memory could be way up, but I found when I looked at it, the council had the authority to fill it, but they also had the authority to call for a special election.
I think that's what happened,
That's it.
because others came in by appointment.
all right. Section 106, a vacancy shall occur when any member of the council shall, before the expiration of the term for which the member was elected, die, resign the office, become disqualified from membership on the council, be removed from office, unless the council is provided by law for filling a vacancy by special election, unless the council is provided by law for filling a vacancy by special election. The following process for filling a vacancy shall apply. When a vacancy has occurred, a majority of the remaining members of the council shall appoint a person to fill the vacancy within 30 days. An appointee to fill a vacancy when succeeding a party member shall be a member of the same political party as the person elected to such office at the time of election. If the council has not acted within 30 days, the county executive shall appoint a person to fill the vacancy within 10 days thereafter. If a person having held the vacant position was a member of a political party at the time of election, the person appointed by the county executive shall be the nominee of the county central committee of that party. An appointee shall serve for the unexpired term of the previous member. If the previous member was elected by the voters' council district, any person appointed to fill the vacancy shall reside in the district represented by the previous member as it exists when that vacancy.
That doesn't have any limit within the 4-year term that, say the person drops dead the day after the election, he's celebrated so high, he dropped, that.
Right.
And your idea is that you.
So I guess, so the question would be, so the couple questions that for consideration. One is whether there should be, this process, if you're comfortable with it. The other is, whether or not the council, realistically, the council can't pass a law to establish special election in the time frame that this provides, most likely. Maybe with notice requirements and rules of procedure and others, it would be very difficult. Unless you knew in advance that someone was going to resign, which is not good. The idea that you're making decisions before voters know necessarily, unless they schedule it and say, I'm going to resign effective 3 months from now, or at the end of the year, for family reasons or health reasons or otherwise. So unless the council already has on the books special election law, then you would go through this process. For me,
But it does suggest it's up to you. You could create special elections today. You don't need the charter change recommended by this commission. You just have to decide you want special elections and put them in place.
yeah. Yes, potentially true. So So the question is, do we have the authority to schedule I guess we could, if we paid.
You do need a law to, you do need to have a law in place that allows you to have.
All right, well, here's my suggestion in the interest of partnership.
You should recommend a law to you.
Well, yeah, I look into this and decide what would require a charter change and what wouldn't. And let's talk through that. And if none of it would require a charter change to do special elections, then, then I can put a bill in, and then, save you some effort. Great. But if my sense is based on the research that's been done, it might have to be a little bit of both. There might have to be an adjustment to the charter change based on the power, the charter rule powers of filling vacancies and a bill potentially on how that would.
We're lucky, we have the same council.
Yeah, exactly.
We have the same.
So maybe this would be an area of follow, but I do think it's an area that we should explore together. And I would love your input on. I mean, this is a great representative group that would be helpful to really think through what would make sense. And you're thinking about these issues in this light. And so I would love to get your feedback.
Andrew, one of the problems or issues I've always had with term limits is someone who is term limited into their last term, you're really not subject to the same type of, some might say pressure, some others might say public persuasion, that would otherwise.
Accountability, public accountability.
So while those groups are there, I mean, these are legitimate groups who want you to vote this way or that way. If you're term limited, you have to worry about that, and you could circulate your resume and try to go to the next level or do something else. So that's one of the issues I have with term limits. I'm just wondering if you see any evidence that that sort of thing actually happens. Term limits.
It's hard to say, but I have not really seen that. I think that regardless of whether someone's term limited or not, if they decide that they're not going to run again, I think the ambition that is innate in serving in public office, bless you, which motivates in certain ways. Someone once said that politicians are motivated by two things: ambition and fear. I don't know if I agree with that entirely, but I think it transitions to a certain extent to legacy, where people start to think reflexively, like, how are people going to remember my term? How are people going to remember my service here? And I don't think that's a bad thing necessarily, but I do think people do change slightly in how they view their decision making and their decisions. I'm not sure it's universally a good thing or a bad thing. I think but I do think you can see the change. That people want to go quickly because it's the end of their term. They want to make sure they get it done before they leave. They don't want to leave it to somebody else. So I think there are dynamics there, but I haven't seen I don't think the power of outside groups has waned politically. I think, if anything, it has increased. I think it's nonlinear because I think there's certain reasons why it is increased. The Twitter and the public videos, clips that can be taken, and all kinds of other things that have given major ammo, so to speak, to outside groups for relatively cheap, and relatively limited amount of time. They can, in good ways and bad ways. Weaponize sounds negative, but weaponize issues very quickly. With email and social media campaigns, they can put a lot of pressure on very quickly with a click of a button and send us 3,000 emails. The emails to the council have increased year over year like 10 times. So the ability even for our staff to keep up with the outside influences is insane. We were just having an internal conversation on correspondence. The expectations of what residents have of our ability to respond and what a four-person staff generally can realistically handle, what central staff here and our policy experts who have to prepare for more meetings or more bills than they've ever had to deal with before is, you know, that gap has gotten bigger and more challenging. What I've seen is there's an ebb and flow also. People were firing out of the gates as soon as they showed up here. Both people coming into their second terms who, you know, we didn't get certain things done in our first term, so you know, we were gonna, you know, we had a list of things that we wanted to get through, and we were gonna, you know, do it. New people who showed up who campaigned on all kinds of issues and wanted to hit the ground running. I think people have kind of settled in a little bit. You know, that initial rush, I think you'll see it at the end of the term too. So I think you get these natural ebbs and flows as you head into election years and others, and as people decide, you know, on, you know, am I focused on my reelection or am I focused on my legacy? And how I'm going to be remembered, or how I'm going to view myself. Like, how am I, did I accomplish what I said I was going to accomplish, what I set out here to do? And again, I don't know that it's a bad thing. I think it's generally a good thing, because I think, you know, most people are here for the right reasons. They want to advance causes they care about. They want to support and help people. They, you know, I don't think most people sign up to do the work because, you know, they want to serve themselves. Or they want to, you know, do negative things. I disagree with certain people on their approach. I disagree with certain people on their policy proposals, but you know, I can't think of anybody who's here, you know, for nefarious or negative reasons.
Thank you.
Well, I appreciate, well, listen, like I said, you know, I hope this is the beginning of a conversation. I'm open and here and available to all of you. I did want to recognize and acknowledge Cindy Gibson, my chief of staff, is on the line here as well. She's the brains behind the operation, so feel free to reach out to her or to me. And obviously, we are very lucky to share a terrific attorney. So she'll be communicating, you know, as well with us, I'm sure, on what you're up to. But feel free to reach out to me directly, because I'd love to engage on any of these issues, or if there's something else that comes up and you just, you know, are interested in a council member perspective. And I used to be a government staff member, so I could, you know, give a staff perspective, but I'd encourage you to talk to staff too, you know, staff who works here as well. I'm happy to do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Council Vice President. I do want to acknowledge, thank you for the kind words. I also do want to acknowledge that Erin Ashbury is on Zoom today. She's with the Office of the County Attorney.
Hi, Erin. I neglected to say you have two great attorneys.
No worries, no worries.
Sorry, Erin, I didn't see you. Well, thank you. I'm right downstairs. So anytime you're meeting here, and feel free to stop by or say hello or just reach out. But again, thank you for being willing to do this. It's very complicated. It's not easy work. It's critically important. And it's really a luxury to have a county and a community like Montgomery County to have talented people who are willing to step up and do it. So thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, we do have a very short amount of time left, but hoping we would be able to, at least today, start some of the processes to look into some of the topics. And here's what I was thinking. We have about 7 topics I counted, basically put on the table between last week and this week. And actually, I think Andrew has expanded the amount of work on one of those issues, which is dealing with the elections. I carved this really into 2 groups. We have 2 or 3 issues that really are specific proposals we could start looking at. And then we have 4 other topics that there are topics to study in search of what those proposals would be. And those seem like longer term matters. So what I'd like to see is if we can get some consensus on moving forward on at least those handful of things that are actual proposals that we could actually be able to put on the table and act on relatively short term. And the things are just going to be studied. We could continue that on discussion as we go forward.
Okay, can I also, can we get to the work groups? Can we?
That's what I'm saying. So what I would like to consider is whether we can at least get agreement on those three things that we really want to move forward, particularly the ones that deal with elections. Because the election cycle is in 2026. And the time to impact that is 2024. If it doesn't get on the ballot and approved in 2024, it will not be effective in 2026. It will wait till 2030, which is a long, long time off. So anything dealing with elections seems like we should start working on pretty soon. Because if the council can't do it in 2020, well, that's what they can do it in 2024, just without our input, and I don't think they prefer that.
It seems to me with work groups,
I agree.
we could be working on multiple things.
I agree with that too.
Sequential, it could be.
Right. So I think since we're really short, identified the three topics that we could start moving forward on are the direct election of council president, the issues Andrew identified here today, dealing with the structure of council and how the offices are elected. And then Karen raised an issue of the Office of People's Counsel, which seems like a very specific proposal. It's either you're either for it or you're against it, and the pros and cons of that are what you need to flesh out. But the concept of what we're talking about is pretty straightforward. The third issue identified is yours, Mike, which is going into having a very specific number, possibly adjusted, and having a very specific date possibly adjusted.
Right.
Those seem pretty specific.
Yeah, the multiple sections dealing with the budget. And so it's under the broad umbrella of budgetary issues, which include the approvals. And then there's this affordability, a report that needs to be generated, and there's no date on that. Section 301. So anyway, that would be something we could discuss in more detail in December.
Right, but I guess I'm saying those three areas, local elections, the Office of Special Counsel, and the budgetary issues you've raised with specific deadlines and numbers are the three things we could start working on immediately. Does anybody oppose sort of kicking those off as the three things we want to start working on right away and have groups work on right away? Anybody have any other concerns or objections or additions to that? Okay, not hearing any, we'll proceed there. So now what we're looking for is, and let me be very clear, this is a voluntary decision of who wants to do, I'm gonna call them study groups. They're study groups for the time being. We'll move into groups of pros and cons at a later time. But for now, it's who would like to volunteer and actually be in the various study groups on those three topics. So we have to keep them below a certain number so that we don't achieve quorums. So consider that, but can we have quickly idea of who would like to be part of the study group to kick off gathering the information, gathering pros and cons, and gathering data or doing research on the council elections and the structure of those elections? We have shows of hands.
You see here, you can't see my hand.
No, there's a hand raising feature, but you're right, I can't see your hand. Okay. So CC is one. Who else we have?
And Mike, question, that's different than the direct election of the council president, right?
No, I want to include all that in one, and if we have to break it up, because we may have too many people, we can break it up. We can have direct election of president and then have all the other issues. It's just, for convenience, I'll say, there's Evan's issue of direct election, and then there's all the stuff Andrew raised. How about that?
So that's fine. I mean, it's maybe the only person that's ever taken an appointed council president and made it an elected position. I think I ought to be on that working group.
Yeah. Okay, so let me go back.
To be clear, so that we don't spin out of control, this working group is on the structure of the county council, correct? Well, correct?
I would say yes. It's all of the things Andrew raised today, other than should we have a direct elected president and how would that work? How about
Okay,
that?
this is structure. Okay.
Okay, so because we're doing virtual and in the room, let me start with in the room so I can move it one place at a time.
Hey, I'm sorry,
the
I'm on
room,
two calls.
Where are the folks who want to work on the council president issue? Jeff was what, but Marvin? Sherry? And I can have a fourth. Do I have a fourth on screen other than Jeff? I see a hand and that's Marcella. My eyesight from here to there, at the end of the room is, by the way, is terrible. Okay, that's Marcella. Okay. So that's our group of four. Okay, on the structure and other issues that Andrew raised. Where are our volunteers? Let's start with on screen this time. Do I have anybody on screen who wants to raise their hand for that? And I'm not seeing anybody.
Could you
David's
restate?
name-
Could
Go
you
ahead.
restate? Oh, I'm sorry.
Can we work on multiple groups?
Yes, oh, yes, yeah, you can work on multiple groups, absolutely. I'm not trying to constrain anybody at all. But I heard a voice from on screen. Is that David's voice?
It was,
There you are.
state again what the domain of this group would be.
This group would be the election structural issues that Andrew discussed with us today, other than the direct election of council president.
I would volunteer to be on that one.
Okay. Okay,
I'll volunteer for that too.
and Mike is also volunteering.
I see the issues as related also.
Okay, so Sherry, so we're gonna have some overlap, which I think is actually helpful.
Yep.
I think it's good. All right. And I will tell you right now, I'm gonna put myself on one or more of these groups, but I'm gonna wait to see how this shakes out first, where the needs are. And I'm gonna reserve the right as chair to stick my nose in anywhere I want, just to try to be helpful, but make sure we don't go over our quorum requirements, so, okay?
And I should just clarify, you can go over the quorum requirements, just that you then be subject to Open Meetings Act.
Yeah, I know, I'm aware of that, but I think having open meetings have to apply to working groups or study groups and informal discussions would not be a wise decision, so. Okay, do we have anybody else besides David, Mike, and Sherry on the structural issue? And I see a hand raised, and it's Marcel again, so, okay. Okay, so we have four there. Let's go quickly to the issue of the Office of People's Counsel, and I'm going to assume Karen wants to do that. I do not know whether, Karen, you need assistance in that group, or you feel you can do it on yourself. Is there anybody who wants to?
People on it.
Huh?
I'd love to have other people on it.
Okay, are there other people who would like to help look for information on that issue? Do I have any volunteers? All right, Karen, I will volunteer to try to be of help.
But if I volunteer skeptically, is that permissible?
Yeah, you can do anything you want skeptically. This is politics and government. Okay, I'm gonna write David's name down as a skeptic. And then our third issue is the issue that Mike has raised with respect to the number of votes needed on council for increasing budgets and the deadlines for, I forget what it was. It was a statutory deadline.
In one of the reports.
Or a report. Okay, so Mike, I'm putting your name down because you raised it.
Yes, please.
Okay. And do you feel you need help with that, or do you think you got that under control already?
I like to have help.
Okay, do we have anybody volunteering to help on that issue?
Yeah, Jim, I'll volunteer. This is
Okay.
Dylan.
Dylan, okay. I recognize your voice, Dylan, for some strange reason, having been really with regional accents. Okay. Anybody else?
Well, that interested me as well. This is David again.
Okay, David, I got you down. Okay. We are at 9:31 and we have accomplished a heck of a lot today, and I am very pleased to be gotten this far. I had some notes on the agenda about some things I think you can consider. I think you all can decide whether you want to have a group leader. I think it probably works best if you have someone sort of acting it. I'll let the groups decide for themselves how they want to do that. I would like to sort of have some sort of a status report, just so we hear back from the groups on where they stand at our next meeting. And you know, what their process is, what they see, what they've done up to that point, and what they think they'll be doing going forward, and where they'll be by, January and February. We don't really need to have formal votes or anything until February. But we will have to think about in December, our public outreach sessions in January, if we're gonna have it at the end of January. So it'd be a good time to know whether we have topics that we're comfortable putting on a sort of an outreach meeting schedule, or whether we don't feel we're far enough to do that. So that's where we are. Do I have anybody who wants to raise anything else before we adjourn?
But an administrative issue, if I could. Could we get the emails of the people of the groups that we're on so we can collaborate,
Yes.
communicate without having to go through, or unless you want us to go through you for all the.
I do, for study groups of small numbers, I do not think you need to go through me. I appreciate being copied, of course, but
So the email that sent, that circulated the agenda has everybody.
okay, everybody's email is on the email where the agendas have been circulated, and if you don't have that, I'll be glad to forward.
Well,
them.
all right, and the minutes will reflect who's on which groups. Right.
Okay,
The other question I have is if the groups want to meet with via Zoom, will the council staff be able to set those Zoom meetings up for us? Or do we need to find other Zoom accounts to support the working groups?
You should be able to create a free Zoom account if it's just for small groups. The council Zoom is on a kind of budget and limited session, so we would not be able to provide that, unfortunately.
Are we required to have records of the meetings, minutes and so on?
no, we're not required to have that. That would be pretty cumbersome. So no, but I do suggest you just keep enough notes so that when you come back to report progress, you'll have something to rely on. Just keep it informally.
Okay.
Do we have any specific goal for these meetings or these study groups for next week, for next month?
I think the goal should be to sort of to have a study plan. I think any research you can do between now and December would be great because it is almost a month. So I think if you could informally meet, in the next week or so to sort of figure out where you want to start looking and who's going to look in which place, by December, you might actually be able to tell us, what you found. It's going to depend on each subject. Some of these subjects are going to be larger and harder than others. So I think as far as you can get in the first month would be great. And I think in December, you can give us an idea of, sort of how much you've bitten off and how much you could chew and where you are.
Jim, because I'm not in the room, would you mind if I just did a quick sidebar? Michael, would you
Yes.
take responsibility for coordinating with David and I?
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
I'll send you emails, yeah.
That'll start the ball rolling. Thank you. Apologies to everyone else.
No, that's perfectly fine. Dale, I saw you had something you wanted to read.
Does the commission need any assistance in connecting with the regional service center directors who are the staff for the citizen?
I would appreciate it. I went online a couple of days ago and literally had to try to collect all the information from
Okay,
the but more importantly, it's also the chairs of the citizens advisory boards. I noticed that the citizens advisory boards, the names of the members are listed, but contact information for them is not. And I don't know if they prefer to go through the regional directors instead, that's fine too, but
it's normal that communication is through the regional service center director.
okay, so if you have something that's easy to push out, that'd be wonderful.
Coordinate with you or with, where do you want me to?
How about just on the Kelly and me
Okay.
together would be fine, that would be fine.
Okay.
Anybody have anything else before I ask for a motion to adjourn? Anybody have a motion to adjourn? I'll move. Second,
Second.
any opposition to adjourning at this time? Not hearing any? We are unanimously agreed to adjourn. Thank you.
If anyone has forms, I can take those.
Great. Thank you. We meeting here in December. I have to look at my calendar, but it should be exactly the same as.
It's second Wednesday.
On the. Yes, hold on, I should have a calendar. It's when second one's.
No, we're trying to figure out how to process it. I'm working with Sandra,
The calendar.
but I have. Yes, I have. them.
I just don't want anyone to miss
No,
like.
sure.
what the-
Second Wednesday.
It'll be resolved this week. It's whether Shirley can pay it.
That's good. I actually think.
Could I ask Sakoni or Matthew a
Exactly, I'm
question?
just thinking the same thing.
In terms of the reimbursement for
o'clock right here.
meetings, we're entitled to be reimbursed